Hi, my name is Catherine Holland and welcome to the Australian Conference of Economics. I would like to thank the Board of Directors for coming here today to watch my presentation. In this presentation, I will be expanding upon the macroeconomic consequences of implementing a VAT tax. To further elaborate on the consequences of implementing a VAT tax, I've broken it down into 5 main sections. 1. How consumption taxes impact consumer and producer welfare. 2. What taxes on imports or tariffs look like. 3. How consumption taxes impact aggregate demand and aggregate supply. 4. The long-term economic benefits of such tax. And finally, 5. How an empirical econometric model can assess the health and economic growth consequences of a VAT tax. For our first demonstration, we will be looking at how consumption taxes impact consumer and producer welfare using consumer and producer surplus. As seen in the diagram to the right, a consumer tax of $1 Australian has been implemented on our product. This implies that the tax burden is being taken primarily by the consumer and hence shifts the demand curve to the left. By shifting the demand curve to the left, the quantity demanded of the good has been reduced. However, as the tax burden is put on the consumer, the price of the product is not reduced. E1 represents the equilibrium price and quantity before the tax has been implemented. E2 represents the price and quantity values after the tax has been implemented. However, the price does not represent the price paid by the consumer. P3 demonstrates the actual price paid by the consumer, whereas P2 represents the price received by the producer. The difference between these two costs is demonstrated in yellow and is described as tax revenue. A deadweight loss has also been introduced, as demonstrated in pink on the graph. The deadweight loss describes the cost to society created by a market inefficiency and is caused by the market's supply and demand being out of equilibrium. The consumer and producer surplus has also been significantly reduced by the implementation of a consumer tax, as demonstrated in green and orange relatively. This implies that consumer and producer welfare is both reduced by the implementation of a VAT tax. Hence, consumers and producers are negatively impacted by the implementation of a consumer tax. For our second task, we will be looking at what the effects of an import tax or tariff looks like. For this example, we will be assuming a world price and supply, as the domestic market is not large enough to impact the international market and price. By implementing a tariff, the price increases moving up the supply curve, whilst the world supply decreases moving up the demand curve. The price of the internationally imported good will be increased, hence decreasing the demand for internationally produced goods. As the world price is now lower than the domestic equilibrium price, producer surplus will increase, whereas consumer surplus will decrease. Hence, consumer welfare benefit will be decreased as buyers will now have to pay a higher price after the introduction of the tariff. Producer surplus will increase, and the tariff will bring in a tax revenue for the government. As consumers will lose more by paying a higher price than producers will by charging a higher price, there is a market inefficiency and hence a deadweight loss will be introduced. By implementing a tariff to international imports of goods, it can encourage consumers to purchase domestically produced goods as opposed to international goods. The deadweight loss in this example, however, is different to the deadweight loss in example 1. In the first demonstration, the deadweight loss is caused by the difference in price paid by the consumer in comparison to the price received by the producer. However, in this example, as mentioned before, the deadweight loss is caused as the consumers lose significantly more by paying the higher price than the benefit received by the producers charging a higher price. To further extend and understand the impact of a VAT tax, the macroeconomic impact of a consumption tax on aggregate supply and demand will be examined for the third example. A consumption tax is described as a tax implemented upon the purchase of a good or service. Aggregate supply and demand are described as the total supply and demand in an economy at any point in time or at a particular price threshold. By implementing a consumption tax, the price of goods is increased, reducing consumer purchasing power. As a result, consumer expenditure is decreased, and hence the consumer aggregate demand is also decreased. Such a decrease can cause a shift to the left in the aggregate demand curve, causing a decrease in GDP and a lower price in economy. Whilst the implementation of a consumer tax affects predominantly consumers, It can also affect the production costs for producers. By increasing the cost of production for producers, the overall profitability of the firm can be reduced, causing a shift to the left of the aggregate supply curve. This can overall cause a decrease in GDP and a higher price in economy. Overall, consumption taxes can decrease consumer spending whilst increasing production cost. Overall, consumption taxes can decrease consumer spending whilst increasing production costs. This can lead to decreased economic output of a country and can furthermore decrease GDP. From our previous example, it appears that a consumption tax aimed at discouraging people from purchasing junk foods can have a negative overall effect on the economy. The following ADAS model demonstrates the potential long-term economic benefits of such a tax. In the short term, consumer spending may be decreased due to less disposable income to spend on goods and services. Producer output and employment may also be decreased in the short term, as firms may decrease production to account for the lowered demand due to reduced consumer spending. This can cause the aggregate demand curve to have a leftward shift. However, in the long run, the aggregate supply curve may have a rightward shift after the implementation of a consumption tax. By implementing a tax that discourages individuals from purchasing unhealthy junk foods, it can increase the overall health of the population. This can further lead to a more productive working and functioning society, of which can further benefit the GDP. A healthy population can also reduce stress on the healthcare system and can lead to lower healthcare costs. Furthermore, the revenue generated through the implementation of such a tax can be utilised in other public sectors such as education, healthcare, and public facilities, of which can further increase the overall production and health of society. For our final demonstration, I will be explaining how an empirical economic model can be used to assess both health and economic growth, both before and after the implementation of the VAT tax. As seen in the directed acyclic graph shown to the left, various variables and factors can be used to measure the success of the tax. Beginning at the top, the tax will inevitably bring in increased government revenue. This can lead to increased public resources and more government funding to other areas such as healthcare and education, of which can be measured. On the bottom, the consumption of junk food will likely be decreased due to the VAT tax, hence the consumption rates of certain products can be quantitatively measured. The short-term effects of a tax have also been demonstrated on the bottom of the graph, including decreased disposable income caused as a result of the tax. Continuing on, the decreased consumption of junk food can lead to a healthier, more productive society. The increased productivity of society can lead to an increased GDP, of which can be measured using an empirical economic model. And that is all we have time for today. I would like to thank you all for coming out here today to the Australian Conference of Economics, and thank you for listening closely to my presentation. Please make sure to visit our stand here today at the conference and take one of our helpful flyers full of all the information presented today. Please also ensure that you follow our LinkedIn for regular updates on any other presentations that we have in the near future. Thank you.